As a doctor, I'm often asked which composer makes this noise when you poke him.
Answer: Carlo Gesualdo, Prince of Venosa, which is in Sicily, and a composer about whom a lot of column inches have been written in our own time, and also his own, mostly because of his spectacular planned murder of his wife and her lover for the crime of adultery. But if we're going to mention that, let's bust a cliché.
Gesualdo cliché number 1, please.
Gesualdo only got away with the murder because he was a nobleman.
Who knows to what extent that might have helped, but in fact, killing your wife for the stain on your character, for the stain on your honour of adultery was not of itself illegal in 16th century Naples. It depended on a number of factors. Gesualdo was later found not to have broken the law, as were others of a lower station at the time. For the record, other 16th century Italian composers involved in murder, and these are just a few we know about, include Francesco Rasi, the singer at the Mantuan court who probably sang the title role in Monteverdi's L'Orfeo. 3 years after L'Orfeo, he was sentenced to be hanged, drawn and quartered, particularly gruesome way to go, for his part in a murder in Arezzo. It was later commuted on the understanding that he never came back to Tuscany. Then Count Ercole Trotti, who murdered his wife, Anna Guarini, daughter of the poet, supposedly for adultery. She was one of the singers of this famous Ferraran supergroup that we mentioned last week. He was later pardoned. Duke Alfonso d'Este himself, the boss at the Ferraran court, murdered a knight who had an affair with his sister. No record of any judgment on that one. All of this, of course, is very shocking, but very much part of a society in which wives were regarded as property and a stain on your character as something that absolutely could not be ignored. We're not going to go into the murder itself, but if you want to know the facts as opposed to all the gossip now and then do pop across to ifagellini.com/Gesualdo1 and Gesualdo2 for very readable articles by our consultant on this episode, Dr. Ruth McAllister, forensic psychiatrist and keen amateur singer. Gesualdo was born the year before Monteverdi, 1566. He was a second son and so not expected to rule. So he went off to Rome to prepare for a life in the church. He was also obsessively interested in music. But then his elder brother died, he became the designated heir, and he married the very beautiful Maria d'Avalos in 1586.
Gesualdo, composer from Napoli, was married, but not very happily.
The infamous murder was carried out in 1590. 4 years later, Gesualdo went on an extended trip to Ferrara, ostensibly to find a second wife, would you? But also because he was fascinated by the avant-garde musical scene there. You might ask why they even received him, but remember that Gesualdo had been found not guilty, and then of course the Duke of Ferrara himself had carried out his own murder that year.
Which was nice.
So Gesualdo came to Ferrara to experience their highly experimental musical scene. This was the court where Cipriano d'Aurore came before writing his more experimental madrigals. It was where Vicentino had invented a keyboard instrument that could play in microtones to play every single interval perfectly in tune. Can you imagine the scales? They take forever. Finally, it was the court where the Concerto delle Donne, the stupendous, highly virtuosic professional female ensemble, performed their secret music for specially invited guests only, including singing highly virtuosic pieces by the court composer Luzzasco Luzzaschi. Gesualdo had a particular regard for the music of Luzzaschi, as we hear in a letter of the composer Alfonso Fontanelli.
Gesualdo has been composing continually, and just having put together 2 new madrigals, he says that he intends to come to Ferrara surrounded by such thick fortifications of works, these were the terms he used, that he will be able to defend himself against Luzzaschi. This latter is the only enemy he fears, he says. The others he laughs at.
I rather love Fontanelli's letters from this period because, as well as being another composer, he was also a nobleman, so he was given the job of chaperoning Gesualdo around and regularly having to clean up after Gesualdo's social faux pas, rather like the King of Hearts, pardoning everyone after the Queen's "off with the head."
With their heads!
But before you feel too sorry for Fontanelli, he also murdered his wife a few years later, for which he was exiled. But back to the letter.
He has not yet been able to see Giovanni Gabrieli, organist of San Marco, but he is laying so many traps for him that finally he too will fall into the nets and once present will not leave without disgust. Father Costanzo Porta was here and was immediately invited, but he was on the point of leaving for Padua. Lucky for him.
Not a man you'd really seek out for a coffee. Let's look at our piece. It comes from Gesualdo's 5th book of madrigals, published 1611, but Gesualdo claimed that he'd written them much earlier and was only now publishing them because others were starting to steal his ideas. The performance is from a live concert Di Fagiolini gave in 2013. That's incredibly unsettling, both for listener and singer. I mean, there's no attempt to establish a tonal centre at the beginning of the piece. You've got something to hang on to. And actually, this fits very well with that phrase of Monteverdi's brother that we had a couple of weeks ago. Do you remember the seconda pratica, the second practice, the new way of writing in which music theory didn't matter so much as long as you were really, really expressing the meaning behind the words. So Gesualdo bang on the ducats there, really. His text beginning with confusion and fear as he screams, "You kill me, cruel one, wicked murderer of love, and you want me to be silent and not cry out that I'm dying? Ah, you cannot be silent about such bitter suffering which comes before death, and because of which I go crying, alas, that I die loving." Now, any one of those lines could be found in one of 100 poems at the time, written to give composers textual inspiration for their strong graphical imagery. But all squeezed together, one on top of the other. I mean, this is barely poetry, it's more a collection of violent cliches. And there's a strong possibility that Gesualdo wrote several of these sorts of poems himself to feed his own need for such unrelenting images. I mean, the texts are unremittingly bleak. They celebrate perversion, they erotize pain and subversion, and as Ruth McAllister says, they lack any reflective distance. Musically, that opening, "You're killing me, cruel one," is set roughly to this harmony. That's no sort of conventional harmonic progression, but it does turn the screw quite nicely several times on that opening melody. And really, it's in one sense old school Renaissance polyphony, in that each of the lines has roughly that melody joined together to make a web of sound, just rather unconventionally. Il mio morir, my dying, is set chromatically, slidey semitones pointing downwards, so that the life force gradually drains out of the word dying. Il mio morir, followed by a big jump for the word grida, which means scream. L'aspro martir, bitter suffering. And see how he finds the dissonances for that. Finishing with all 4 lower voices jammed onto consecutive notes. Ya-da-da-dum.
Clusters. Nice.
At the end of his life, Gesualdo reprinted his madrigals, not in the usual part books, 1 book for each voice, but in score. We don't know how often composers scored up each other's music in their own hand on a bit of paper to take a look at, but this is Gesualdo at the end of his life having it actually printed as a sort of vanity project. By the way, our new website's out. It's absolutely marvellous. One of the features of Gesualdo's score is the use of bar lines. You don't generally see these at all in vocal works of the time, but here they are, starting off quite regular, 4 min impulses to a bar. But later on that changes, and they seem to relate to the speed of the notes. So when the music is very slow moving, you'll get a bar like this one, which has 8 minims, instead of 4 on that slow alas, oime. To ones with faster notes that only have 2 minims in. That makes it easier to keep a hold on where you are. I've mirrored this in the I Fagiolini edition, and like Gesualdo's own edition, there's no new time signature every time Gesualdo changes the number of minim counts in a bar. That may throw you a bit when you come to read it and make you curse such an earlier than thou way of thinking, but I think it's a small but interesting indication of how he saw his own music. You just had to keep counting minims. 2 other good moments of word painting. The word grido came up earlier, didn't it? The word I scream. I scream, you scream, io gridi, tu gridi, noi tutti gridiamo per il gelato. No, it doesn't really work, does it, in Italian? Here's an even bigger scream, and I love the way there's a sort of roll forward into it, and then followed by this big 8 minim bar of oime, alas. Then there's another dying, no sexual implication here, I think, and the music feels as if it's about to go, but in fact goes.
Oh, that's done him completely. He was expecting the leg break, but he got the googly. That's marvellous work from the maverick Neapolitan wrist spinner.
Before a rather odd last passage on the word amando, meaning loving. It looks very odd to me because such fast notes would normally imply something like flames or great speed or flying. Now the phrase they come from says, alas, that I die loving. So you could read these fast notes as the throes of death, a gradually expiring last breath sort of thing. But the Gesualdo way, and indeed the late 16th century mannerist way of doing things, is not to set the overall meaning of the phrase of the poetry, but the individual word. And that word here is amando, meaning loving. So you could take this as proof that Gesualdo's own view of love was something ephemeral and frothy to be portrayed by a load of fast notes. And this would go with what we know, what we think we know about Gesualdo's own personal relationships, which is that he didn't have any functional ones. So how far can we associate the extremely unsettled nature of the music and the graphic depiction of text with the character of Gesualdo himself? And how much is this simply just normal way for a late 16th century madrigalist to express themselves? That takes us to...
Gesualdo cliché number 2, please.
Gesualdo was so tortured by his guilt for the murders that he wrote twisted music.
We can't know for certain what Gesualdo felt, but from his actions and his interactions with other people throughout his life, there's very little evidence that he felt any guilt, or almost the opposite, in fact. And the twisted music seems to have been much more, in my opinion, his response to the highly competitive compositional atmosphere in Ferrara, with him trying to outdo all his rivals.
Gesualdo cliché number 3, please. Ooh.
Gesualdo was so tortured by his guilt that he showed remorse by writing music on that subject.
Well, see above. But ask yourself whether the subject of this poem, or indeed the subject matter of his magnificent Tenebrae responsories, which are sung in Holy Week and are partly about the betrayal of Christ, are really about guilt or more about betrayal. Surely two sides of the same coin. Betrayal was the title of our Gesualdo show with director John Labouchardière back in 2015. Here's a little clip. Such powerful music and fantastic performances by those 6 singers. Before you ask, no, the whole show is not available on video, but its predecessor, the full Monteverdi, is. Just Google Vimeo, the full Monteverdi, and you can see it for just £3.99. How do you perform a piece like this one? Well, as the elephant said to his mistress the mouse, this isn't going to be easy. Quite apart from the notes themselves and fairly advanced level tuning issues, what sort of vocal colours do you bring to it? Do you sing it all at one speed, or do you play around with tempo? Well, writers of the time talking about both keyboard music and solo song tell us that bending the pulse is good, sprezzatura, a sort of freedom of the beat, tenuto we might call it. But as always, look for clues in the music. There seem to be times when you need to allow a silence to be a little longer to allow the piece to breathe, and to allow the phrase to have its full weight. Or a bending of the pulse can add colour and meaning to a particular moment of dissonance. My motto is always that you can bend but not break the pulse. Also look for a straight tone at moments of dissonance or moments of particularly strong consonance, so that can speak more strongly. But otherwise for a really strong ringing Italian tone to bring the music the drama and the tension it craves. Our live performance from 2013, which we're going to sing along to now, attempts to do as much of that as we could in the heat of the moment in a live performance, according to the acoustics of the room and according to the amount of energy that you built up until a particular point, according to the good tastes of the performers. In other words, then as now, always the guide. That's it. Usual stuff. Please pop over to ifagilini.com/friends to pay a little something to keep these episodes going. Can't do it without you. Feel free to pay for several at a time to save you and us all the admin. Do also subscribe with that little button down there, and please take a moment to share if the episode has been to your good taste. No episode next week because we'll be preparing for our Live from London concert on Saturday, August the 8th. A fabulous all Monteverdi programme as part of this amazing series of vocal groups hosted by Voces 8 that starts on August the 1st with their own concert. £80 season tickets for all 10 concerts, which you can get from us at london@ifagilini.com. It's not too late as there's catch up for a few weeks afterwards. Now here's Greg Skidmore with The Warning. Greg knows this piece, having sung it in Betrayal. Any advice on singing Gesualdo, Greg?
Dudes.
Ah!
Okay.
Never